nobody thought this was going to happen. And I appreciate Kim Jong-un doing this and allowing them to go. We've picked a time, we've picked a place for the meeting, or summit, as you like to call it. And I think it'll be very successful. But as I always say, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But it's going to be a very important event.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has returned from his second visit to North Korea. And this time he came back with 3 American detainees. Pyongyang says the release of the prisoners is a gesture of goodwill ahead of a planned meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. But there are concerns. Pyongyang will use it as a bargaining chip for concessions on U.S. sanctions. As for now, Trump hails it as a political victory. But is it one that could be headed for a diplomatic defeat? Well, to discuss that question and others, I'm joined now by Jenny Town in Washington. She is the Assistant Director of the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and also in Washington. Will Saetren, he is a Research Associate and Program Officer at the Institute of China-America Studies. Thanks both so much for joining us. Jenny, let me start with you. I mean, is this a political victory for Trump? Should the U.S., first of all, be thanking North Korea for the release of these prisoners, given, according to the U.S., these were innocent men abducted by North Korea?
Well, certainly it is important that they were returned, and it does open some political space now and create the right environment for having more serious, more substantive talks on denuclearization and on U.S.-DPRK relations, as this certainly was an obstacle to being able to have a productive and, really productive dialogue about talking about how to normalize relations between our two countries. Certainly, the sentence that these men got was more grave than what is warranted in this issue. But, this is something where, we do have to be mindful of the fact that they have been there, and securing their release is a very positive step forward.
Okay. I mean, I don't think anyone is saying it's not wonderful that they are now free. But Will Saetren, I mean, is North Korea looking to be rewarded for using innocent men as pawns?
I think so. I think they are trying to appeal to Donald Trump's, the side of his personality that is more prone to be pleased by flattery. But to go back to your original question, I absolutely do not think that the United States should be thanking them or grateful that they released these prisoners. It was a sign of good faith. They should have done it from the get-go. They shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. So it was a positive thing, as Jenny just pointed out, but I don't think that we should be in a position where we're thanking them.
Do you at least agree, though, with Jenny that it does pave the way for this summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un?
I do, to a certain degree. Quite frankly, I think everybody was surprised. If you remember about a month ago when Trump just accepted this invitation to the summit, I think a lot of people in Washington, myself included, were very surprised and disappointed that he did not make a point of at least setting the release of these prisoners as a precondition for the summit. That's not to say that the United States should be in the business of setting preconditions for talking, but to give Kim something as valuable as this, a meeting with the American president, which he has wanted for years, we should at least have secured something in return beforehand. It's happened now. That's very good news, and we can move forward. Okay.
Jenny, I'm just going to ask you this quickly as we're talking about these, specifically these prisoners. Has Otto Warmbier been forgotten, do you think, in this case? Trump said that there will be consequences, serious consequences for North Korea for letting that young man die in North Korean custody.
I don't think he's been forgotten. I think it's hard to assess kind of where we are right now and how this will play into the U.S.-DPRK talks. It is very unfortunate, the condition in which he came back in. And, I would push back a little bit, though, in terms of how to characterize the detainees, is that, by North Korean standards, they had violated some North Korean law, and it's unclear to us exactly what that was. But just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that isn't how it was perceived. So, it is good that they've been returned. It does clear one obstacle out of the way. Certainly it will be addressed, I'm sure, as part of ongoing dialogue. But it does help, set the path forward as to, there is something that can be done on the human rights issues. There is more that should be talked about in that process, including the South Korean detainees that are still in North Korea. And eventually, the longstanding issues of South Korean and Japanese abductees, as well as other human rights issues as well. And President Trump has certainly made human rights one of those issues on the agenda when he talks about North Korea.
Okay. Will, let's move it even further forward then and talk about the summit to come. These two men will be meeting face to face as per the plan. Now, after all this bizarre, and if I can call it petty name calling, I mean, we had Trump calling Kim Jong-un little rocket man and Kim Jong-un calling Trump let me pronounce this correctly, dotard, resurrecting a term from centuries ago to say he's almost a senile old man. How do you think they might fare face to face? Are these two somewhat, unpredictable, eccentric leaders that will actually end up kind of speaking the same language when they sit down together?
Well, that is certainly the hope, that they will be able to see eye to eye. I think in terms of what you just described as both of them being eccentric leaders that are somewhat unpredictable, I actually only think that goes for one of the leaders, and that's Donald Trump. I think Kim is incredibly smart and calculated. If you recall what Moon Jae-in said after the Korea summit, he was incredibly impressed with how he handled himself, how he didn't rely on his advisors during the meetings to prep him. He could think on his feet. So quite frankly, I would be very surprised if Kim Jong-un hasn't read The Art of the Deal. In fact, I almost can assure you that he has. And I think he's gotten a very good sense of how to get what he wants from Donald Trump. I think Kim Jong-un is preparing for this meeting much more so than Donald Trump is. And I think that has to do with vanity. I think Donald Trump thinks that he's just going to hit a home run his first time at bat. And I think Kim knows what's at stake, painfully so. Lessons from his father and his grandfather, and he's going to bring his A game to the summit.
Okay, Jenny, I can see you're pretty much on the same page there. Let me bring in another element, though, as well. Former President Barack Obama warned, that Trump's pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal actually set a dangerous example for North Korea, because if they negotiate and agree to denuclearization of the peninsula under whatever terms, in a few years' time, seeing how the United States has behaved under this administration, that negotiation and the deal could be revoked. Do you think there's some truth to what Obama said?
Well, I think, yes, there is, but, North Korea knows better than anyone that this is the case. This is what happened with the agreed framework back in 2002, is that as soon as you had a change of administration, as soon as there was an obstacle there, instead of working through and renegotiating and dealing with the cheating that was happening, they simply walked away. And they've seen this happen more than once. They've seen, drastic shifts in North Korea policy, both in the United States and in South Korea, with presidential transitions. And so, if anything, for North Korea, this just sort of reinforces that hesitancy and that bias in this process. And what it does is it sort of also tells them that, hey, if we do make a deal with Donald Trump will stick to it. And the U.S., we will have this policy for now. But then, as soon as Donald Trump is gone, we should assume that we'll also have to renegotiate, or this deal might even be done.
Okay, Will, I want to get your take on that. First, let me just notify you both that we've just received word now that the TrumpKim summit is now confirmed for June the 12th in Singapore. Interesting choice of location, as many thought it would be in the demilitarized zone before Trump said no, he would not, he basically ruled it out. So first of all, Will, if you can comment on what Jenny had to say there about Obama's prediction, and then we'll go on and talk about this, this summit taking place in Singapore.
Absolutely. I think Jenny's really right on the money. I think Obama was right. I think that this has set a very, very dangerous precedent. The executive branch of the United States cannot be trusted, and that is something that Donald Trump now owns. Any deal that was negotiated with Obama can clearly be torn up. Any deal that is negotiated with Donald Trump can clearly be torn up. There are even more uncertainties in this equation. The North Koreans don't know that Donald Trump isn't going to be impeached in the middle of their negotiations with him. They don't know if there's going to be a legislative landslide for the Democrats in the midterms. So that said, I don't think all hope is lost. I think that the North Koreans are aware of this, but they're going to be very cautious in their negotiations. Quite frankly, I think that puts them in a stronger position as well. I think knowing that Donald drew up the Iran nuclear deal for no particularly good reason, that's going to make him somewhat more eager, maybe even desperate to strike a good deal with North Korea, and that's going to ultimately give them more leverage. And let's remember that Kim Jong-un also just was in China for a second time, and I can assure you that he and Xi Jinping discussed how they could get more on the same page, and ultimately that would strengthen North Korea's negotiating point in this upcoming summit with Trump.
Okay.
That said, I think it's incredible that they have now set a date and time. That was one of the big things that Pompeo was supposed to achieve, and I think it's great that that has now happened.
Okay. And Jenny, I mean, your thoughts on the choice of Singapore for the location of this conference in just 1 month's time now?
It's an interesting choice. I think it's a country that, the North Koreans are very comfortable in. They do have good relations. It does provide a bit more of a glamorous setting than what you would have had in Ulaanbaatar. And I don't think it's surprising that it's not in the DMZ, considering, you've already had one Panmunjom declaration. To have a second one simply wouldn't have the fanfare that you would have if you have it in a separate location. So it's, I think in Washington we're relieved it's not in Pyongyang for the optics that would have created, and so I think it's an interesting but good choice.
Okay, we're down to our final minutes, and Jenny, I want to step back for a second and get actually both of your thoughts on this. You raised a point, Jenny, in what you'd said earlier. You said, although it is rather disconcerting that Secretary Pompeo referred to Kim as Chairman Un after this 13-hour meeting or before, rather, when he was on his way to Pyongyang. You said, it's a rookie mistake that raises red flags about how prepared the U.S. really is for this engagement process. You see it as a serious folly. Why does it matter? He slipped up on a name and said Chairman Un. According to him, it shouldn't be this big of a deal. Why is it?
Well, I mean, it's the basics. It's like the fundamental things you should know. It should be second nature. If you're working with North Korea, you're working with Kim Jong-un, you should know. And it should be rolling off the tongue, Chairman Kim. The fact that you don't know the difference between the last name and the first name really does matter. And it shows how little knowledge base there is right now in this administration as they're moving forward. And the point that Will made earlier is what you see is on the North Korean side, they are very prepared. The people that are working on their North Korea, on their American division have been doing this for years. They were part of the agreed framework negotiations. They know the Americans inside and out. They've been following domestic politics. They've been following foreign politics. So they know what to expect. They know how to prepare. They know sort of the parameters of what's realistic and what they can get going forward. And so when you have such a sort of rookie, amateurish mistake on the U.S. side, it really belies a greater concern as to, what does the U.S. really think, what do they really know about North Korea, and how much are they going to give away? And I think we had this problem, again, back in the Leap Day agreement, when you had a negotiator that didn't know North Korea and didn't get what he needed to do to have a solid, secure agreement.
Okay. Will, I can see you agree. Unfortunately, I can't let you respond there because we are completely out of time for this segment. I'd like to thank both of you really so much for joining us. Very insightful on this edition of The Newsmakers.
Thank you so much.